We invite you to stay tuned for the live broadcast of the Wednesday evening Bible study of the Mayfield Drive Baptist Church, located at 271 Mayfield Drive, Smyrna, Tennessee. We will now join the service.
Okay, we want to welcome you back to our Wednesday evening Bible study. We are continuing in our study of the life of Paul. We are still in the second missionary journey, and this evening we're going to be looking at Corinth. Our text verses come from Acts chapter 18, verses 1 through 11 for this evening. After these things, Paul departed from Athens and came to Corinth, and found a certain Jew named Aquila, born in Pontus, lately come from Italy, and with his wife Priscilla, because that Claudius had commanded all Jews to depart from Rome, and came unto them. Now this was a historical event. There were 3 different times that the Jews were banned from the city of Rome. And in this particular one, I don't remember which one that it is, but this particular one, it affected Priscilla and Aquila. And because he was of the same craft, he abode with them and wrought, for by their occupation they were tent makers. And he reasoned in the synagogue every Sabbath, and persuaded the Jews and the Greeks. And when Silas and Timotheus were come from Macedonia, Paul was pressed in the Spirit, and testified to the Jews that Jesus was Christ. And when they opposed themselves and blasphemed, he shook his raiment and said unto them, Your blood be upon your own heads. I am clean. From henceforth I will go unto the Gentiles. And he departed thence, entered into a certain man's house named Justus, one that worshiped God, whose house joined hard to the synagogue. In other words, it stood right beside the synagogue, butted up to it. He departed, okay. And Crispus, the chief ruler of the synagogue, believed on the Lord with all his house. And many of the Corinthians, hearing, believed and were baptized. Then spake the Lord to Paul in the night by a vision, Be not afraid, but speak, and hold not thy peace. For I am with thee, and no man shall set on thee to hurt thee, for I have much people in this city. And he continued there 1 year and 6 months, teaching the word of God among them. By way of introduction, the city of Corinth figures very prominently in the Bible, especially in the New Testament. The church at Corinth, if in existence today, would be one with which we probably would not want to fellowship. The majority of the problems with the church were the result of the prevalence of opportunities for sin, especially of the sexual nature. Because of this, let us consider the city and the culture of it with its background. And as you well know, if you followed me for very long, you know that I like to give a lot of background and customs and culture and geography, what have you, because the more that we can understand that, the better we can understand what the scriptures are trying to relate to us. And so there you have a picture which demonstrates both Athens and Corinth and the possible distance between them. Yes.
Brother Joe, it's interesting that this subject, it's like the old saying goes, there's nothing new under the sun. And
Mhm.
it's almost the same move that we saw with the Church of Corinth is happening in churches here in America. The culture is becoming more and more vile. And it's, as I put a note here, that it's becoming almost totally refined sensuality.
Yes. Yes. You are correct. All right, so let's look at Corinth a bit. Corinth, a Grecian city on the isthmus which joins the Peloponnesus to the mainland of Greece. It's about 48 miles west of Athens. The ancient city was destroyed by the Romans around BC 146. And that mentioned in the New Testament was quite a new city, having been rebuilt about a century afterwards and peopled by a colony of freedmen from Rome. It became under the Romans the seat of government for southern Greece, or Achaia. Chaia. Achaia. Okay. All right. Acts 18, verses 12 through 16. It was noted for its wealth and for the luxurious and immoral and vicious habits of the people. Australia comes to mind when I think of Corinth. These were composed of, Corinth was founded by freedmen, which meant they were not necessarily Roman citizens, but they had somewhat to do with the Roman government, but they were free. But you get the idea that they were pretty rough characters also. It had a large mixed population of Romans, Greeks, and Jews. When Paul first visited the city around 51 or 52 AD, Gallio, the brother of Seneca, was proconsul. Here, Paul resided for 18 months. And that's your reference there is chapter 18, verses 1 through 18. When he first became acquainted with Aquila and Priscilla, and soon after his departure, Apollos came to it from Ephesus. After an interval, he visited it a second time and remained for 3 months. And that's chapter 20 and verse 3. During his second visit, his epistle to the Romans was written, probably AD 55. Although there were many Jewish converts at Corinth, yet the Greek element prevailed in the church there. Some have argued from 2 Corinthians 12:14 that Paul visited Corinth a third time. That is, that on some unrecorded occasion, he visited the city between what are usually called the first and second visit. What that is, the proof of that, I have no idea. But the passages referred to only Paul's intention to visit Corinth. And the comparison of 1 Corinthians 16:5, where the Greek present tense denotes an intention or a plan, in other words. An intention which was in some way frustrated. We can hardly suppose that such a visit would have been made by the apostle without more distinct reference to it. He would not have he would not have let something like this go by without some mention of it. All right, Corinth was a city of corruption. Corinth was a large city in the first century with a population estimated at 200,000 people. And for an ancient city, that is a lot. Well, it's a lot for modern day cities, but especially for ancient cities. Today, the population is only about 50,000. Interestingly, modern Corinth is located about 5 miles from the ancient city. But why was this city so big then and not now? The main reason was its geographic location. Corinth was located on a land bridge, which is a small strip of land that separates two bodies of water. This bridge is located in the center of Greece. So if you lived in southern Greece and needed to sell some goods in northern Greece, you would have to travel through, or at least very near, Corinth. Even ships were carried over the land bridge because of the short distance. As a result, Corinth became a large commercial center. I want to pause right here and reading more after this isthmus. Small ships were able to be ported across that isthmus on logs that were laid out. And they pulled it along on those logs from one side to the other. Larger ships were not able to be handled that way. Instead, the goods would have to be unloaded with the ship on one side, carried across, and then loaded on a ship on the other side of this little isthmus. All right, a second attraction was the number of temples located in and around the city. Now, another note to what I just said, that meant that there were a lot of travelers, sailors, what have you, that were going through or very near Corinth. So, and there were many temples to the various gods. Historians claim there were 12 in all. One of these was the temple of Aphrodite, the goddess of love. Her temple was situated on a hill about 500 feet above the city. In order to worship this goddess, men participated in immoral acts with quote-unquote priestesses. Devoted to serving Aphrodite, there were approximately 1,000 of these priestesses. Because many of these travelers did not believe in God, their moral standards were lower than those of Christians. Although many of them were married, they believed they could justify their actions because they were attempting to please Aphrodite. And of course, you know, some men would claim that was their goddess just to be able to do that. Thus, Corinth, quote unquote, became a word in the Roman world that signified inappropriate relationships between unmarried people. In other words, it was not a good term. Another important temple was the one dedicated to Apollo, located in downtown Corinth. Known to the Romans as the god of music, light, truth, and healing, his most important task was making sure the sun rose and set every day. According to mythology, he would harness 4 horses to his chariot and drive the sun across the sky, and in his spare time, he taught men medicine and practiced archery.
That's what you do in your spare time.
Yeah, I don't know how he could have spare time if he was pulling the sun across the sky.
Send the horses on cruise.
I suppose so.
Well, to be fair, they didn't know that it was the entire world at the time, so they probably just thought he went.
Yeah, from one side to the other. Yeah.
Oh, and the teaching was a night job.
Yeah, I guess it would be. Yeah, because he wouldn't be pulling the sun behind him. Okay. What happens in Corinth stays in Corinth. 1 Corinthians. The city of Corinth was the Las Vegas of the ancient world. It was located on an isthmus that allowed sailors, merchants, refugees, and adventurers from all over the world to mix together, blending their customs and ideas. Corinth was rich with agriculture and a variety of export products. The city had adopted a quote-unquote pleasure now philosophy, and nearly anything went on or was able to go in this party city.
Kind of what's happening to the States.
And what?
Kind of what's happening to the United States.
Yeah, yes.
And that word, anything goes, exactly what it meant.
That's right.
I mean, they did things with animals and children.
Yes.
They're doing that all over the world too.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. There was a saying, quote, not everyone can go to Corinth, unquote, meaning that if you were lucky enough to visit Corinth, live it up.
Disney World.
Yeah, I can see why it is called the modern Las Vegas, or the ancient Las Vegas, rather. According to one commentator, quote, it must be remembered that Corinth was one of the most wicked cities of ancient times, and that the church was surrounded by heathen customs and practices, unquote. When you look at the church at Corinth later on, it's no wonder that this church had some problems. Because of what they had come out of and their environment, shall we say, and their surroundings. Yeah, it's no wonder that the church had a lot of problems. While this environment certainly made for some unique challenges, where else would you have to specifically tell a church member that sleeping with his stepmother was a big no-no? There were some notable bright lights in the city. The Apostle Paul started a church there on his second missionary journey. Priscilla and Aquila, the spiritual power couple who were themselves refugees from having been expelled from their home city, were leaders in the Corinthian church. They mentored a talented and bold evangelist named Apollos, who had a thriving ministry. But he wasn't completely knowledgeable as to what he should have been. And there you have a picture of some of the ancient ruins of Corinth. And I think that that mount in the background was famous for something. No, I don't have it in our notes. But let's look at Corinth in Paul's time. What can archaeology tell us? On his first visit, Paul came to Corinth from Athens. He apparently stayed in Corinth a year and a half, teaching the word of his God and baptizing believers, Acts 18, 1, 8, and 11. According to Acts, it was in Corinth that Paul, after his preaching, was rejected by the Jews, first turned to the Gentiles. From now on, he said, I will go to the Gentiles, Acts 18:6. But if you continue looking at the life of Paul, you'll notice that he never neglected to try. What? Sorry? But they were not first after that. You are correct.
He didn't go to the synagogue first.
Right. While the account of the apostles' initial visit to Corinth and Acts is more or less dependable, the most fascinating window on Paul's ministry in Corinth comes from his letters to the congregation from 1st and 2nd Corinthians. Now, it has been said that, and I don't think I have this in your notes, but it's believed that he probably wrote 4 letters, but only 1st and 2nd Corinthians are what survived. Some believe that 2nd Corinthians is a combination between the second and 3rd letters. But, there's no way of saying, well, this is exactly the way it was, because we cannot.
If we really need to know it, God would have put it in the Bible.
Absolutely. They would have been included in the scriptures. And we say again, I don't remember whether it was Jamie or Brother Bernie, we have in the Bible what God wanted us to have.
Yep.
All right? So,
There's not more out there, but that's what he wanted us to have.
That's what he wanted us to have, yes. There we learned that Paul drew his Corinthian converts from extremely diverse segments of the population that often differed in their opinions and practices regarding such matters as sex, involvement with the quote-unquote world, spiritual gifts, and the future resurrection of believers. At least some of these Christians had serious suspicions about the legitimacy of Paul's apostleship, and indeed even about his personal integrity. When Paul speaks of his constant anxiety for the churches he has founded in 2 Corinthians 11:28, he surely includes the troubled congregation of Corinth. As our previous quotes indicate, Corinth was a very large and prosperous city. Upon his arrival, he soon found Aquila and his wife Priscilla. They had been forced to leave the city of Rome because the emperor had commanded that all Jews had to leave. Thus, they settled in the city of Corinth, where Paul met with them. They were all tent makers and were soon conducting business in Corinth. They were probably located in the Corinthian Agora, which according to historians was the largest in the world at that time. Yes. Well, it had more than just a marketplace. Marketplace was there, but many would set up permanent shops, and a lot of commerce was conducted there. Some of the Jews tried to turn the temple into a little bit like that, you recall, and Jesus took a whip to them. Yes, sir.
In today's time, the closest you can get to what the agora was is the underground bazaar in Istanbul,
Okay.
which is what an agora is basically.
Yeah.
The only difference is most agoras were open, whereas the one in Istanbul is all underground.
That was like it was in Romania. It was like in the subway area, but it was, that's what you're talking about, isn't it, brother?
Yes.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
you can get lost in the one in Istanbul.
Yeah.
I mean, it takes hours to walk through the whole thing.
And the gypsies love them.
It's not for the faint of heart. Let's put it that way. There's parts of it that are great for tourists, and then there's other parts you do not want to go.
Istanbul, not Constantinople?
All right, this location provided Paul plenty of people to present the gospel. He didn't have to go to them, they were coming to him. They probably had a very lucrative business being located there. It was crossroads with travelers from all points of the compass. Aquila and Priscilla had already established a home in Corinth, so Paul joined them in their home and trade. On the Sabbaths, Paul went to the synagogue and reasoned with whoever was there. Verse 4 relates to us that many Jews and Greeks were saved. And I have this quote. Perhaps it was his teaching, lecturing, discoursing in the synagogue of Corinth that he later wrote of becoming all things to all men, that he might by all means win some, as regards customs where no moral or ethical principle is concerned. Silas and Timothy soon joined Paul in Corinth. They had been in Macedonia and now caught up with Paul. See that in verse number 5 of our text. Paul became so frustrated with the Jews that he, quote, shook the dust off his feet, unquote, and declared to them, the Jews, that he would no longer preach and teach to them, but rather unto the Gentiles. So the Gentiles became his main focus. He declared himself to be clean of their blood, meaning he had done all he could do to preach the gospel to them. After his departure from the synagogue, Paul was able to resume in the house of Justus. Justus was a Gentile who was interested in the gospel. His house was attached to the synagogue next door. As a Gentile proselyte, it was easy for a mixed audience to be there and hear Paul preach. Verse 8 relates to us that one Crispus, the chief ruler of the synagogue, was saved, and all of his house. Apparently, because of his conversion, many Corinthians were also saved and baptized. I found in mission work that that principle many times will come about. You lead someone to the Lord and they're saved, and then you baptize them, and then it's like a domino effect because of the influence that they have on other people and other families. I've had that to happen in mission work more than once. Verses 9 and 10 lets us know that God revealed to Paul that he was to continue as he was doing, and that he, God, would keep him safe. God was warning Paul not to be concerned about what was to soon come, but to continue on. God states to Paul in his dream that he had many people in the city of Corinth. No doubt he was referring to even some who had not yet believed, but would. Albert Garner had this to say concerning this statement. I quote, "Because I have a great many people existing in this city, already in the city. How they had come to be or to exist already as his is not told. Some hold that they were unsaved, but God just foreknew that they were going to be saved. This interpretation seems to be born out of presumption without scriptural justification. The greater likelihood, based on certain scriptural justification, is that in this international port city, converts from Pentecost had found their way there and already won many to the Lord, though they needed to be taught the way of the Lord more perfectly. So any questions, comments before that we go into the conclusion? I remember in the class with Brother Lanier, Clyde Lanier, we were studying the book of 1st and 2nd Corinthians. And his words were that there was, well, to this extent, that there was nowhere in the world that was as wicked and perverse as the city of Corinth.
Brother Joe, and that same, Brother Lanier had, after I graduated, he got his, one requirement he had for his students was that he had them write by hand every word in 1st and 2nd Corinthians. He said, because if you wanted to find out what was right about a church and what's wrong about the church, those two books. But if you understand the background, like you're saying, you understand why they had a problem with speaking in tongues, because that was part of that ecstatic religion, whatever. And like you said, there's no place as wicked as Corinth. But I think we've reached that place here because that's seeping into New Testament churches.
Yes.
The influence of God's word is not like it used to be.
That's correct.
And churches are beginning to adjust to the culture to keep the congregations.
Yep.
It's affecting here, you know. And there's not many places where the Corinthian mentality is not
Present.
present within, even in
Right. I agree. Yeah. I'm so glad he waited till I got through his class before he started that.
Do what?
I'm so glad he waited till I got through his classes before he started that.
Pick a lock, pick a lock. I guess a lot of it is, we used to have tag team preaching services in school. Did you ever do that?
Uh-uh.
Where we would have a subject, and then we were only allowed to go so far, and then the next preacher would come up and continue on with it, and then go so far, another one would come up. They called them tag team preaching times, yeah. So we had to know our subject.
Yeah, I see that. All right, in conclusion, verse 11 lets us know that Paul continued in Corinth for 18 months teaching the Word of God. However, things were about to change. We'll consider that change in the next part.
All right. Any questions, comments?
You've been listening to the live broadcast of the Wednesday evening Bible study of the Mayfield Drive Baptist Church in Smyrna, Tennessee. We invite you to tune in at the same time next Wednesday evening for another live broadcast of the Wednesday evening Bible study. We would love to see your comments regarding this broadcast. You may email us at imbr@imbmpodcast.com. That's imbr@imbmpodcasts.com. Or you may write to us at International Missionary Baptist Radio, P.O. Box 1676, Smyrna, Tennessee 37167. That's International Missionary Baptist Radio, P.O. Box 1676, Smyrna, Tennessee 37167. Thank you for listening, and may you have a blessed day.